Sam Telfer is not only the Mayor of Tumby Bay, but also the pre-selected candidate for the seat of Flinders. How are you going today?
Yes, very well. Always good to talk, mate.
Now, we'll get into the topic of Rex Patrick, the independent senator's comments about you in a moment, but he's relating to the conversation about Eyre Peninsula Rail and a meeting that happened on Sunday. Give us your version of events of what went down at the meeting from your point of view.
Oh, look, it was obviously an opportunity for people to come together. It was a meeting that the South Australian Transport Action Group put on. You know, that's the group that have been very noisy in the Adelaide Hills on the opportunities for rail, and they decided to put their sights on the Eyre Peninsula as well. It's a subject matter which I'm well aware of because I've been fighting very hard for the rail network over many years, and also appropriate investment back in the road network. The rail line on the Eyre Peninsula stopped being used about 2.5-3 years ago, unfortunately, because it was a mainstay for over a century. But the way that the grain delivery system had developed, that was no longer financially viable. But the meeting was put on, and I was looking forward to going down there. I was invited to attend to listen to locals and actually hear a bit of local perspective. But unfortunately, it wasn't really any local perspective that was heard. There was 10 minutes at the end that got to have some questions from locals. But apart from the candidates for Flinders, it was all people from the other side just telling us on the Eyre Peninsula what we need rather than the locals driving the agenda.
So when you say people from the other side, what you mean the other side of the Gulf, over from the Metropolitan or Hills point of view about what rail needs the Eyre Peninsula had? Yeah,
so it was the members from the Transport Action Group. There were obviously politicians. You mentioned Senator Patrick come over and had his say. It was really just an opportunity, I thought, to hear from locals, but in the end, the locals weren't really heard. And that's what my task is going to be over the next few months, to make sure I fully understand the infrastructure needs that we are going to have on the Eyre Peninsula, not just now, but obviously into the future.
Well, Rex Patrick in the Senate, in the last conversation that happened in the Senate yesterday, I think he paraphrased you in saying your view on rail freight was trucks, trucks, trucks. Is that an accurate paraphrase of where things should go in terms of freight on the peninsula?
No, look, obviously not an accurate one, and it comes from the perspective of coming in well after the event and trying to take political points. And that's the frustration for me, people trying to score political points on an issue which is so important for us on the Eyre Peninsula. Look, obviously trucks are a major part of the grain and freight movement on the Eyre Peninsula. We're a big peninsula. Even when the rail line was in play, trucks were a major part because, believe it or not, the rail line doesn't go to everywhere where there's grain, doesn't go to every silo that growers have to deliver to. So trucks have always been a pretty important part for us. And as their size and their efficiency has grown, then the rail has become more and more redundant, and that's the point it got to. As I said, unfortunately, because we've been fighting for a long time to still keep it open as an option. We've talked about even just the bottom end being utilised from Cummins down, or smaller portions of it, but it got to a point where Viterra and Jennifer and Wyoming couldn't come to an agreement on the future of it. Government tried to provide opportunity to be able to keep it to continue, but that didn't happen. What is really important now is that we actually continue on with the investment in our road network. So we've seen a lot of investment over the last few years due to strong advocacy from local representation, and I certainly recognise Peter Trelaw and Rowan Ramsey I've been working closely with for the last few years. As soon as the announcement was made about the rail closure, we got on the phone and made sure that we're on the same page with what the priorities were. So we've seen plenty of shoulder sealing. We've seen overtaking lanes being constructed. We've seen extra investment in the road network all across the peninsula, and it actually services multiple export opportunities, not just the ones, the single endpoints where the rail line goes to.
One of the major challenges, it seems, from where I sit some way away, is this issue of the demand end on freight down to Port Lincoln and looking at alternate ports, and there's been a few proposals. Is that part of the solution here in terms of the demand for rail versus maybe getting something a bit further up the peninsula?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely the exciting part, which we've been obviously looking at for a long time here on the Eyre Peninsula, is the opportunity for ports over and above the normal ones of Port Lincoln and Thevenard, where the majority of grain goes out. We've seen investment into the facility at Lucky Bay, the Teaports facility, which has been in play for, this is its third season now, and that's brought in competition to the grain market on the Eyre Peninsula, which wasn't there before, and has meant that has been opportunities for growers to have an advantage from it. And we do see there is proposals which have been bubbling along for a while on other port sites. There is deep water on the Eyre Peninsula which could be utilised, and we're looking forward to hopefully those business cases moving along and construction happening. That is another reason why the current rail line, which is a narrow gauge and is contained only on the Eyre Peninsula, is not connected to the national grid, and it only services Port Lincoln and Thevenard. So we need to make sure that any investment in infrastructure is strategic in its nature and forward-looking, not necessarily back-looking.
Now, just so I can clarify, you are the Mayor of Tumby Bay at the moment. How does that interplay running as a candidate? Do you have to resign as Mayor, or can you run as Mayor? There's local government elections later in the year. How is that going to play out for you?
Yeah, come closer to the elections, Ricky, I'll be stepping aside from my duties. Obviously, I've got local government roles, not just in council, but all across different levels of leadership. So in the coming few weeks, I'll start to step aside from those roles and make sure there's no ambiguity about the difference between the different roles which I'm playing.
And that, I guess the council would then appoint a new mayor for that interim period, or would there be a caretaker period? Yeah,
so there is, as you pointed out, council elections next year. So council at that time would decide whether they put in an acting mayor or whether they actually go back to an election. But because it's only going to be a matter of 8 or 9 months until the next council elections, they can decide to put in an acting mayor from within the council.
Right, and just lastly, you mentioned Peter Treloar earlier. He's finishing up as the local member. You're hoping to win the seat for the Liberal Party. Were you part of the valedictory observations yesterday in State Parliament when he was signing off?
No, only from afar, unfortunately. We couldn't get over there. But I think the reflections of the years that Peter spent in Parliament really is someone of integrity, someone who's worked hard for his community, made sure that he's been representing the vast electorate of Flinders to the best of his capacity, and someone who's actually got respect from all sides of State Parliament. And I think that's something which is really important, something which I'll aim to do if I'm lucky enough to be the member for Flinders. But they've certainly been a good example provided by Peter Treloar, and someone who's kept his integrity all the way through.
Well, Sam, I dare say we'll be speaking with you a lot more, and by the looks of it, we'll be hearing a lot more from Rex Patrick about the Eyre Peninsula as well. So we'll chat regularly about the real issues that are actually down there on the ground. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure and always good to talk about real issues and not just political games.